always needs like 3 minutes, 3 seconds or something. Okay, welcome. Welcome to our last panel of our conference, Climate Justice and Feminism. And this panel has the name Feminist Solution for Climate Justice. And I love to welcome 3 different women from different regions or from around the world who are with us today, this evening. And first, I would love to welcome Dorothy Nalubega from Uganda. You can wave so people know who you are. And well, you are a climate justice activist from Uganda and also an activist for women and other vulnerable groups' rights. And also you are the chairperson of Kuna Women Sustainable Agriculturalist and Environmental Group, where we will hear more from later. And then I would love to welcome Neth Daño, co-executive director of the ETC group. And the ETC group monitors the impact of emerging technologies and cooperation strategies on biodiversity, agriculture, and human rights. And you are a researcher who has extensive experience in development and policy work on issues in agriculture, biosafety, climate change, and environmental governance in Southeast Asia. Welcome. And also I would love to welcome Helena Marschall, an activist from Fridays for Future and also an activist for climate justice. And she's a student for economic and politics. So welcome to our panel. And I would love directly to start in our first round. And I would love to do the same thing I did last evening. Not like to ask a dry question, but either ask for stories. Because for me, it took me a while to understand that, well, because I'm a woman, my voice didn't count the same way. And that I had to work sometimes 5 times harder to get recognition. And as soon as I start to show a little bit of emotions, well, I count as weak and not fit for the job to fight for climate justice. Well, also inside our climate justice movement. And for me, it helped to hear other stories or other perspectives of women who have the same experience to understand that it's, well, it is just because I'm a woman that I get treated in that way. And so I would love just to break the ice and to share some stories, bad or good, funny or crazy. So what do you, what is your special story? What do you connect now with the topic of climate justice and feminism? So who would love to start? I don't know.
I mean, I can start. I feel like I don't have a very spectacular story because it's so much more in like the little moments that we see again and again, how even in like a space like the climate justice movement, which is fighting for like a more just world, and we still have to obviously deal with the patriarchy and we still have to deal with inequalities in our society because they don't go away like in the climate movement or in climate spaces. And, you know, a lot of the time that's just seeing your idea that you just said get said again by a cis male in the room who, and then it's suddenly the best idea in the world. And then you think, wait, I just said that. Or that you see again and again how we, you know, how women often don't even raise their hands and they don't even take part in the discussion because, you know, they think, okay, maybe my idea is not as good as I thought, and so on. And I feel like that is obviously something that's not specific to the climate movement, but something that's specific to our society as a whole. And that can be really exhausting to, you know, we are already fighting against these huge inequalities. We're fighting against, you know, fossil companies. We are fighting against so much. And then to also have to fight against that is obviously not really that great. But at the same time, I've also, in the climate movement, had this like amazing group of women. I've met like so many amazing women who support each other, who have safe spaces, who come together. And that is so empowering to see, that even though often women get on social media like a lot more comments and really sexualized comments, that we like come together and persevere. And that really inspires me to see like all the other amazing women in this movement doing like really cool things.
Thank you so much. I can recognize so much in your answer. Neth or Dorothy, do you would love to add something?
Yeah, I'll go next. Like I really empathize a lot with what Helena told us. Like I've experienced that so many times in the movement. This is both the environmental and climate justice movement. It could be very, very subtle, especially in discussions among peers where you have men who are supposed to be progressive and aware and awakened, but as Helena mentioned, like the deep-seated patriarchy in many cases is hard to shed. But concretely, like I work in the technology front, in the technology sphere, like environmental technologies and also climate technologies, and it's a very, very macho world. Like in many discussions that involve other actors beyond civil society, I would sometimes end up as the only woman in the group discussing issues on climate technologies, both adaptation and mitigation. And you could actually sense, the condescension in many cases among men on the table whenever I speak. And there's also an additional layer of discrimination there, like it's less being in the South, but actually more being coming from civil society. Like in the technology front, there is this assumption that someone has to have the credentials, like the academic credentials of being able to talk about and critique technological solutions. Like they would even ask, like, what is your background? When they say, what is your background? What is your academic background? And also they would say, NGOs are supposed to talk and also deal with communities, like basically putting you in a corner that you are not on par with them. And these are mostly men. And in a few instances, I've actually been called out about being emotional. I've never heard that being said to a man in any discussion, but always to a woman. And as I said, in a few circumstances, I've been called, you're being too emotional. Or they would even say very subtly that we cannot rely on emotions when we talk about climate and environment. It has to be science-based or evidence-based. Like actually saying in many ways that you are talking based on your feelings and less on concrete evidences and science, as if those are two mutually exclusive. And as I said, always being said to a woman or to women in the conversations, but never to a man. So these are very subtle. Sometimes you really have just to call it out, and you would become very, very defensive about it. And as Helena said, like it's really a struggle, for activists in the climate and also environmental movements to address this. Like I hate saying to prove yourself, because I really don't want to prove myself to anybody, especially among peers in the movement. But that's what it turns out. Like you have to prove yourself, like show that you have credentials, and also that it's beyond feelings, that you're talking about evidences and science. So it's really a struggle, a multi-layer struggle for women to be dealing on these issues, and also assert that we are equals, and really also highlighting the issues on feminism in both the environmental and climate movement.
Thank you so much. Dorothy, do you want to add something, or can you hear us?
You're muted.
Yes, I can hear you. And I would like to add something. Actually, it's in form of a story to tell you. Are you hearing me well? Can I continue? Okay. Oh, all right. All right. Let me tell you one story that I encountered during my first years of leadership. I belong to the East African Greens Federation as an executive member in charge of women, children, and vulnerable groups. Whenever we got funding for an activity, I always asked that some portion be allocated for women's activities because we really wanted to do an activity on gender and energy. But they always said it will be a side event on a big activity and only on the last day. So one time I said to myself, why don't I write a proposal specifically for East African women? Because we don't get time to do our own stuff. I did write one. It was gender and clean energy, because we are the ones who suffer with cooking. I wanted to do something like that, but you know what happened? When Green Forum of Sweden agreed to fund our activity, and they talked to the East African Greens executive, which was then dominated by men. When the men learned of it, that we are going to have our own activity, independent of them, the coordinator for the Swedish Greens of Green Forum did not even feel ashamed to tell me that, Dorothy, you know what? The men feel so bad that you are going to have a workshop without involving them. So what we are going to do is to reduce on the number of days for your activity so the men can join you for another program. So I even wondered that even this gentleman from a civilized part of the world can give in to the cries of the men. Imagine they refused to give us time during the past activities. And when we decided to have full time, they came in and even dictated on which women I should put on my invitation list. But I'm telling you, that's the last time I danced to their tunes, because they dominated our discussion and we didn't even achieve our goals. Our women didn't have time to talk for themselves, because these people, the men, dominated our workshop. From then on, I got the power, and I was encouraged to fight for our rights, the rights to be heard. So I mean, that thing hurt me so much, and that's why now I try to fight for the rights of women and climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, which is pretty bad. And I would love to continue for our next round and go in an event that's also go a little bit in the same direction, because Neth, I would love to ask you, because I remember when I first met you some years ago at the UN-Klimakonferenz, you told me also a lot about false solutions. And I love to ask you again if you can explain to us what did you mean with false solution tackling the climate crisis? And also, do they have something to do with fewer women in decision-making structures?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, for remembering that. Yes, I remember telling you that in one of the UNFCCC COPs, and we're probably a few years after that, and never have I seen a year when there was there's so much false solutions that are being peddled as the solution to the climate crisis. And false solutions are those fixes or solutions that are being promoted to address the climate crisis in particular, and often includes environmental and biodiversity crisis, using this crisis as the justification to advance solutions and fixes that only scratch the surface or even address the symptoms but not the root cause. And in many cases, these solutions are technological in nature, making us believe that technological fixes are going to solve a problem that is way beyond technological in nature. In the case of climate, biodiversity, and environmental crisis, these are actually structural in nature, as we know, and even more so in the discussion of climate, where there's a lot of justice issues, injustice issues, both historical, generational, and also when it comes to the relationship between North and South, and of course, the fundamental issue of reliance and dependence on fossil fuel. None of these technological issues address that. Let me cite examples of false solutions. In the current cries, over the climate crisis, the urgency to address the climate crisis, solutions like geoengineering, hiding behind the name of carbon dioxide removal, net emissions technologies, are being promoted as the solution to the climate crisis, to global warming in particular. And among this, like in the case of carbon dioxide removal, cases like CCS or bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, or BECS, are being promoted even at high level as the solution to take us out of this crisis that we are stuck in. But if you will look deeply into the solutions, including, for example, CCS, they do not at all address dependence on fossil fuel. So not at all touching the root. They're just saying, okay, because we have been burning and will probably continue to burn for generations to come, we'll give you a solution that will suck carbon out of the atmosphere, or will capture carbon before it escapes into the atmosphere. We'll give you net emissions technology. And lo and behold, not surprising that in many cases, the primary pushers behind the large-scale adoption of these technologies, including BECS, for example, are actually actors in the fossil fuel industry. The biggest investors on CCS technologies or BECS or DACs, direct capture, air capture, are actually fossil fuel players. Big oil, including Shell, for example, or even the most desperate solutions like solar radiation management actually have the big oil behind them. The link between big oil, who have brought us into this problem, and also countries that have that continue to support this despite all the rhetoric, are behind this false solutions. So it's easy to be deluded. It's easy to get trapped, because they will continue to use the climate crisis as the justification and make us believe that, well, even if we stop breathing, we will not be able to address greenhouse gas emissions. We might as well adapt these technologies, bringing us into that trap of slippery slope, and also making us believe that technological fixes can save us from this crisis. So these are examples of false solutions, concretely in the climate sphere. I hope I've answered your question. Oh, one more. Interesting. I'd like to link it to my story earlier, that in many of these discussions, I always get struck by the prominence and dominance of men whenever technological fixes are on the table. It's almost always men. Like, I cannot even find examples or incidents where you have women pushing for geoengineering. Like, it's always a clique of men, most of them white, in the north, who also boast of really sterling academic backgrounds as claiming that they have the solution, that they're going to save the world from this mess that we are in. And yes, often voices of women, particularly women who have no background as Harvard or Oxford, are often left voiceless in these discussions, because they would always say it has to be science-based, as if concerns of communities, concerns about children, concerns about the impact of the climate on the ground are just secondary stories behind or after, that will come after, the high-tech solutions that are brought into the table. So that's my response, Catherine. I hope that I answered the question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I also would love to ask Dorothy, what do you think about false solutions? So from people in decision-making structures, what are your experience in that? And by any chances, is there also a connection to the topic gender justice?
You're muted, Dorothy.
Can you hear us, or are there some connection problems? Okay, I'm not sure if the connection is working right now, or yeah, you're there.
Hello?
Did you hear the question?
Hello, were you talking to me? Because I got off because of the connection. Am I the one speaking next?
Yeah, so I also would love to ask you, because I know that you're sometimes really busy dealing with people in the government on every level. So what do you think about false solution? What is your thought on that? And also if there is also a chance, if there's a connection on the topic to gender justice.
Catherine, could you please repeat the question for me? I got a problem with connection, but I think it's on now.
Yes.
She asked to repeat the question, Catherine.
Okay, sorry. So my question to you is, can you hear me right now, or is there a problem?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Perfect. So my question to you is, because I know that you are really involved in dealing all the time with people from the government, also from other organizations, and also dealing with people in politics on different level. What is your thought on false solution tackling the climate crisis? And also if there is a link, do you think, to the topic of gender justice?
Well, it's true that I deal with people in the government, especially the local government and in the council. And yes, there is a connection because first of all, the council is mostly dominated by men, and even the few women I'm talking about, I'm giving you a case study of Wakiso District Local Government or Local Council where I work. Our council is dominated by men, and the women who are there also don't get the chance of talking or of being heard or of their decisions being respected. For example, when there is something like building a well or a stream where to get water from, when they're making a decision, and it is something that will help the community because there is no water, the men will not support it a lot because they don't know which problems the women get, and the women who would have wanted to support it are few, and yet the majority takes it all. So if it is by count of hand, the men will mostly win the discussion. And then there was also a problem of men thinking that whatever they say, the women should support them. For example, I'm sorry, I'm giving this example because I asked permission from that gentleman. There was a man in the council who also had a wife who was also in the council. And when there was a subject and the woman didn't support it and the man supported it, he came out and said, how can the woman not support what he has said, and yet he is her husband? I told Sula, what you have said is so bad, and I'm going to use you as an example in one of my feminist discussions. He said, Dorothy, you can go on, but you know very well that it's not right for a woman not to support what her husband has said. So in this case, I'm saying that there is still male dominancy in the councils, both local and national level. And with the government, for example, because most offices are dominated by men, when they decide to send women, for example, to corps, it is men who decide. That's why you see that most of the people who represent government here are men, because there are many in government offices. That is how offices and councils are connected with climate justice here in Uganda.
Thank you so much for your answer. So now I would love to go from Uganda to the situation in Germany. So Helena, how is the situation in Germany in the climate and energy politic and also economy? Who has the power there, and is this a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite obvious. It's mostly older white men. I kind of get them all confused because I feel like a lot of the CEOs and, you know, people who are sitting in the power positions kind of all look the same. We see that all over the world, that the people who got us into this problem in a lot of places are not women, it was men, you know, who decided to put profits over, you know, my generation's future and over people's lives all over the world. And yeah, we see that especially concerning fossil fuel companies and the energy sector and technology and so on. It's a lot of, you know, the power positions are men, and that can be a huge problem. Obviously, we see that again and again when we're trying to, you know, in conversations with those people, but also in the way that yeah, they react to youth activists, and most, you know, the worst of all, it doesn't really matter as much if they respect us as activists. You know, the worst is obviously what they're doing to our resources and to the environment and so on.
Thank you. So my next question would be again to Dorothy, because, well, we heard just from the situation in Germany, and Germany as one of the countries who's, well, as an industry nation, is one of the reasons the climate crisis does exist. And well, but the climate policy right now doesn't is not on the level of the Paris Agreement. I would love to ask you if it's okay, because in Germany we don't discuss this topic on a daily basis, or we don't discuss it when we talk about climate policy that much. Who is most affected by the climate crisis right now? And also the question is, how much power in decision-making structures do they have as the people who are most affected? If you like to tell us about that.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's not a rumor that women, especially in the global south, contribute less to the greenhouse gas emissions, but they in fact suffer the most because of the gender inequality and the gender social constructs in Uganda, Africa, and other parts of the world, especially in the global south, that dictate some roles for women. Women are the ones who are responsible for house chores and taking care of the whole family. Because of the prolonged droughts, hunger sets in, and it is the women to suffer looking for food. They go long distances to look for firewood and water, where they get a lot of problems like being raped or kidnapped on the way. Besides, in Uganda, women are mostly employed in the agricultural sector, yet this sector has been so affected by climate crisis, making them jobless. And remember the IPC report in 2018, it said the world's poor will suffer most, and everyone here knows that the highest percentage of the world's poor are women. So they're already suffering because they cannot even afford some of the adaptation measures. And when it comes to decision making, women are few in the decision making structures because it is so complicated for them to compete with men, since they spend most of the time looking after families, offering labor on farms. They do not get enough time to campaign. So they are few in parliament and in council. And even the few ones who are there, like I already said, the decisions are not respected. They are not given the chance to talk. Like I already said, I work with local council 5, so I always see them in council. Women are sometimes even reminded of their places. Like a man is not ashamed to tell you, you are a woman. What are you talking about? So their voices regarding climate justice is really missing. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have like a little follow-up question, because I also know that you're really involved in the UN climate negotiation. So why is it so important, especially for women of the global south, to get involved and to make their voices heard there?
Thank you very much. One thing I know is you cannot separate women's rights and climate justice. There cannot be realization of climate justice without respect for women's rights. For example, land rights. Most women in Uganda do not have land rights. There's some trees called eucalyptus, which are known for making the land and its surrounding very dry and infertile. But because it is commercial and because the men are naturally money-minded, they prefer planting those types. And since the women do not have land rights, they cannot dictate, even if they wanted to plant indigenous trees like mutuba. I don't know what it's called in English. I have a local name, but these trees are indigenous and good. And also women sometimes want to plant fruit trees. So as they serve environmental protection, they serve as something to eat for their children and for their family. But the men end up destroying land fertility because we do not have a say. And yet when the land becomes infertile, it is women who will suffer the consequences. Most offices are dominated by men. That is why the COP23 Gender Action Plan is lacking. When the Minister of Environment sends delegates to COPs, the delegation is full of men because they dictate on the lists. So you find that the decisions are mostly dominated by men, yet women are not only the ones who suffer most with climate crisis, but they're the ones who have the power to change the situation. So it is really hard for us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to stay on like the international level of the UN Climate Conference and negotiations. And well, today it's the day of the Paris Agreement, and 5 years ago, it was the first time that also the 1.5 degree target was written down in the Paris Agreement at the UN Climate Conference, and it was also an effort, especially from countries from the Global South and the international civil society for climate justice. And Neth, I would love to ask you about the Paris Agreement. So after 5 years, what is your conclusion of it, especially in terms of gender justice combined with climate justice, and how should we go forward?
In terms of gender justice, interfacing with climate justice, definitely we're very far off from even the gender-related goals of the Paris Agreement. Like, of course, women and the women's movement were very hopeful. Women working on climate justice were very hopeful that gender justice would be integrated in the whole implementation and also the deliberations around the Paris Agreement. But it's been a struggle. It's been a really, really tough struggle in the last 5 years. There are some accomplishments in terms of having a gender work plan, also having some discussions on gender and adaptation, gender and loss and damage, but it's the same pattern that you have gender discussions on one small portion, small tiny section, and everybody else discusses climate issues without even a gender lens. And that's not ideal, because as mentioned by Dorothy, unless there is gender justice, you can never achieve climate justice. Now, because the role of women, the recognition, not just the recognition, but really the institutionalization of the key role played by women in addressing, in delivering climate justice, also the need to address the fundamental structural problems, like land rights and the gender issues around land rights, access to resources. Unless you address those, we are really very far off from even addressing the Paris goals, and much more so in reaching or achieving climate justice. We cannot go on deliberations about conceptual gender issues in climate issues and have that in a tiny corner while the rest just go on, without even lens, consciousness, or even a recognition of the fundamental need to address gender justice when you talk about the climate crisis. So you can never have it separate. It has to be integrated. It has to be institutionalized. And we're very, very far off from that. But of course, hats off to the women's movement who have been really asserting and also using optimally the available spaces that are offered in the Paris Agreement, largely because it recognizes the role of women, human rights on paper, but putting that in action is a long way to go. And concretely, I was actually also struck that despite the Paris Agreement, despite all the work on having a gender action plan, work plans in the UNFCCC and in the Paris agreement, like I was struck that the technology discussions, the technology deliberations within the Paris Agreement continue to be male dominated and male oriented. And I would say male orientation, the hard technology orientation, that in order to effectively address concerns on adaptation and mitigation, technology, as in the hard technology, has to be there. Like there has to be like hard technology solutions that are factored in, even gaining prominent attention over the soft ones. And it's really striking how women then enters when they start discussing soft technologies. The soft technologies involve innovation, community actions, those things, and that are always associated with communities, always associated with women. And this is very, very typical conceptual framing in a patriarchy. We haven't really gone away from that. Unless we go away from that, as mentioned by Dorothy, unless we address the gender injustice that has brought us into the situation, aggravating the climate crisis, we will never get out of this frame. Sorry for being pessimistic about it, but it's also a challenge, for us to start addressing this. Like there's increasingly attention and time, or even media attention being given to generational issues, and Helena and the Friday for the Future has been also has to be given recognition for their role in that. I wish we could also have that in the case of women, like really integrating gender justice into this whole discussion on how to address the climate crisis, and really bringing the solutions that are brought by women at the community level, at the national level, at the global level, on par, with the attention, investment, and money that is being put on the macho solutions, largely hard technology. So yeah, so I hope that would actually be taken as a challenge rather than being looked at as a very pessimistic view on the situation.
Thank you. I have a little follow-up question. So very concrete. Can you tell us also more about the topic? Why do we need a gender-based strategies to deal with the cruel reality of the climate crisis we already have? Like when a cyclone is hitting countries and islands, why is it also so important to have gender-based strategies?
Oh yes, of course. As I was mentioning earlier, gender-based strategies, or even the whole discussion of gender justice, cannot be just an adjunct or an afterthought or a small discussion in the overall climate justice discussion. It has to be integrated, incorporated in all that. And as you mentioned, gender-based strategies, largely because women, it's not just traditional, but it also comes in our nature of caring, not just caring for the family, but caring for the community and caring for nature. The working with nature strategies are often associated with women, largely because of a patriarchal view that women should take care of caring. And I think we should bust that caring comes with us as nature, that the solutions lie in caring for nature and caring for each other, not in how do you call it, this term about subduing, not about subduing nature. I think the subduing nature framework that is associated with patriarchy is also responsible for the problems that we have. Like, why don't we flip it around and start framing our strategies about caring for nature, working with nature, and yes, gender, and that's really at the heart of gender-based strategies. really addressing the problems right from the community, right from the family. Like, for example, concretely, in the case of cyclones, last month, like, we had a series of 3 strong typhoons in the north that have really brought so much devastation to our compatriots living in the north. So much flooding. Like, in fact, there are still communities that are flooded at this very time that I'm speaking, because this is typhoon season, and you have this super typhoons that many scientists have actually associated with global warming because of the historical warming of the Pacific that have really brought so much force to these typhoons, devastating communities in that eastern seaboard of the Philippines, and all that. And it's really striking that that many of the prominent solutions, quote unquote, that are being promoted, and largely by men who are there at the top of the bureaucratic ladder, who are heading the government and local governments, and also acting as spokesperson around the crisis brought by this typhoon, that the solutions that are being prominently promoted are actually about infrastructures, technology, like building more floodgates or building more dredging, and then, like, if you hear about the stories that barely get the headline but really are being told in the media, as part of the sub stories in media stories, like women talking about planting trees, also taking care of mangroves, and addressing the issue of deforestation and illegal logging. So these are 2 parallels. You have prominent government officials who are mainly men, I'd say almost 100% men, talking about infrastructure, building more infrastructure, floodgates, dredging rivers, and building communities in higher grounds. But here you have secondary stories of women who are really pushing for solutions that are closer to home, that can actually bring us back closer to nature, that are manageable by communities, that also address the fundamentals, which is inequality in terms of access to resources, and also disempowerment caused by usurping and abuse of power, that are really bringing about massive deforestation, illegal logging, and mining. So these are parallel realities that we need to put together towards a gender-based strategies that incorporate gender sensitive strategies, and bringing together the so-called soft and hard technologies, and putting that into practice by putting political will into it, putting financial investment, and also a lot of energy into it, collective energy into it, not just as an aside, not just a small discussion in a corner. So I think unless we incorporate all that towards a meaningful gender strategy, it will be a far off dream, for us to address the climate crisis. It's really time, over time, long time, for us to be hearing about women solutions that are pushed by women that are actually gender sensitive. So that's my long answer to the question, Catherine. It really fires me off the question. Thank you.
Thank you for all the information. It was amazing. And so my next question would go also to Helena, again to the international level. So because Fridays for Future 5 years ago didn't exist, but now you are there, like the next generation of climate activists, climate justice activists. And what does the Paris Agreement means to you and to Fridays for Future? And how do you want to go forward? What are your demands?
Yeah, so I think from in opposite to a lot of other people in the climate justice movement, Fridays for Future has from the very beginning had the Paris Agreement kind of as a basis. So from the very beginning, it's been like a very clear message that this, it's already been signed. Governments have already actually agreed to do all this stuff, and now they just have to keep what they signed, and they have to keep what they promised. And I think that puts us in a very different position in where we start with our argumentation. So the Paris Agreement builds like a basis for a lot of what we as Fridays for Future do, and what I as an activist do, because it's reminding people again and again that there was already a compromise, there was already agreement between global states, where already 1.5 degrees is going to be really bad for a lot of people who are already suffering under the climate crisis. So that was already like an international compromise that was made, and that builds a lot of what that's kind of the basis for a lot of the work we do. And that's why we actually had a huge day of international action yesterday, basically for this anniversary, reminding everyone that we need to fight for 1.5, where we had actions all over the world kind of commemorating this day. And so I guess in that sense, we haven't really, that's not going to change how we move forward from this point. But at the same time, we obviously see that this agreement is not really working, because now all these governments are putting in their new reduction goals for 2030 and 2050 and so on, and we see that in the end it doesn't add up. So we don't arrive at 1.5 degrees, and we see that the UCO, which decided its CO2 reduction goals on Thursday, that's also nowhere near Paris conform. And that is obviously means that we can't stop fighting. So we need to just fight harder, and we need to continue actually the work that we've done over the last 2 years. And it's not going to be easy. And I feel like what we've seen though in this past time is how conversations and discourse with people over the world and with people on the front lines of the climate crisis can really bring that conversation along, kind of. So hearing from people who are feeling the effects of the climate crisis quite directly right now, and are still protesting and are still lobbying for change, has been quite impactful to myself in the last few weeks. And I feel like that's really something that we're hopefully going to be doing more, moving along, kind of highlighting voices and showing what 1.5 means, basically not as an agreement, and not as a list of degrees and reductions and so on, because all these things can kind of seem very, very far from reality, and kind of talking a lot more about what that means personally, and kind of bringing that emotion to the table. Because in the end, we're not going to build connection, we're not going to build a societal majority by talking about facts. We're going to reach those by telling stories and talking about each other and how the climate crisis affects us and other people. And I hope to be doing that a lot more moving forward.
Thank you. I would love to stay with you for the next question and go, because you built the bridge also to us as a movement, how we start to create like this other world which could be possible as a movement, and also tackle the issues of gender justice, social justice. And I know that one of your topics is the importance of intersectionality. And I also know that this word, maybe some of the audio members doesn't know the word yet. And so I would love just to ask you to explain the reason, so the meaning, and also the reason why it's important to you.
Yeah, so I think that the basic belief behind the term intersectionality is that we cannot look at societal crises and societal problems as isolated from one another. So I feel like we've talked a lot about that without naming this word. We've talked a lot about that this evening already, how we cannot look at feminism as a separate issue from the climate crisis, and we cannot look at it as a separate issue from our social problems and so on. And because we already see that the climate crisis is not affecting everyone equally. So we cannot, you know, aim to solve it with blanket technology solutions or blanket solutions. We need to solve it with the people who are most affected. We need to solve it, you know, seeking to get rid of these huge inequalities. And that is also what the word, you know, what climate justice is all about, you know, creating a more just world, and not just creating a world in which we have less emissions. Because, you know, we're not doing, I feel like a lot of the time we use words like saving the planet or saving the world. Like it's not about that. It's about saving the future of humanity and, you know, making a world that's livable for us. So this is all about making a world that's better for people to live in. And we cannot make a better world for people if we don't look at what the different crises are that are affecting us right now and that are affecting different people in different ways. And so that's why it's so important that we think of this as a societal problem as a whole, and that we think of the climate crisis as not an isolated issue from all these other crises. And we can do that on like an international level all the time, and we can also do that on like a small level. So we actually did some different campaigns together with different groups concerning like labor reform and better pay and so on, because in the public transportation sector most recently, because that is an issue where we see again that we cannot think of, you know, of reform of job markets and reform of working conditions separately from the issues that are facing us as a society. And it's the same thing with feminism. If we're seeing that obviously women worldwide are affected more harshly from the climate crisis, then we need to take that into account when we think of solutions. And I think that's kind of most important, because otherwise we're not being honest to ourselves about what this means, and we're not, you know, looking further than maybe our own feet, because, you know, I personally might not be affected as much by the different inequalities in our society because, you know, I'm a white privileged young person living in Europe. But that's, you know, it would be unfair if I then seek to only find a solution, or if I only seek to lobby for solutions that are, you know, maybe most profitable to a certain group of people.
Thank you so much. So I would love to stay on the topic about our climate justice movement. And my next question would go again to Dorothy. And also it's a little bit like a follow-up question. So as well, the question is like, really, are we as a climate justice movement, are we already a feminist movement? What do you think about that? And do we think enough as a movement about the topic of intersectionality? And if not, what has to change?
Catherine, could you please repeat the question for me? I'm sorry. This is on and off. I'm trying to do my volume. Catherine?
Yes.
I can hear you well now. Could you please repeat the question for me? Sorry, I don't know what happened this evening. The network is bad.
No problem at all. So my question to you, because I want to stay at the topic of our climate justice movement. Do you think that we are already like a feminist movement, or do we have to try harder? And also, do we think and do we talk and act enough about the topic of intersectionality? And if not, what has to change?
I think I cannot say that we are not yet there, that we are not acting like a feminist group. We are really trying. We are acting like a feminist group. It's just that people don't want to listen, and people don't want to know the truth, but we are really acting it. About what we are doing, what we are talking about now, these topics we have have. And we don't only stop there, we go on our social media and always remind people. So I really think I cannot say we are there, but again, I cannot say that we are not doing much, because I always follow you on Twitter and I see what is going on. I follow Hilda, I follow other people from other parts of the country, and I think we are really there. And we just need to be encouraged by what we are doing. For example, I know we haven't realized the goals of the Gender Action Plan, which was achieved in 2017 at COP23 in Bonn. But at least there is a change in numbers. But what brought about the change in numbers? It's because of the noise we make, us as the people in the movement. At first, people didn't care about that, but when we start making noise, when we start talking about it, it really happens slowly by slowly. The Gender Action Plan is not fully achieving, has not fully achieved its goals, but for the numbers, there is an increment. So it's one of the examples to show that we are acting like a feminist group and that we should be encouraged by the small things we have achieved to go on. I know that in the end, we are going to achieve more than that if we fight more. Thank you.
Thank you. Neth, I also would love to ask you, because, well, you're very experienced in working for like huge NGOs and groups, working together with them. And they are also like part of the climate justice movement. So how is there also like, should we also like change cultures there in parts, in terms of that women should be more like, not only the heads of the NGOs or groups, but also like be included in the important decision-making structures inside environmental NGOs?
Because sometimes even within the movements, imagine the movement is fighting for women rights or gender rights, but they're not even acting as one. They think they still come in and dominate. So it should start with from home. Like it should start, like they say, charity begins at home. If you're really fighting for gender justice, why don't you show it by living it? The feminist groups should walk that talk. It should begin with them. They should let the women also be heard in their own homes before they go out to tell others to respect women's voices. That needs to change, because it is there even in gender groups and feminist groups.
Thank you. So I would love to ask Neth one question and then go to the other round. Because in Germany, the huge environmental NGOs, so all of them, or most of them, they have all males as like the chief person. And so for me, it's also like a question, how can we, inside our climate justice movement, when we look to the NGOs or to big groups, how can we also there fight for more gender equality?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Catherine, and very touchy question as well. Like while you were asking the question, like my mind is veering, like thinking about the environmental justice movement in the South and also the role of women. Like in the past 10 years, I've actually, or even more, or even earlier, I've actually seen this big wave of women, young women in particular, really playing lead role in environmental movements in the South, in particular. Like I cannot think of a big environmental group now that has not put a woman in a lead role, not necessarily the executive director, but really lead role. But there's more and more directorship, coordinator among environmental justice organizations in the South that are being taken on by women. And I hope to see that in the North as well. Like as I review in my mind the North Americans, there's much more to be done. But of course, we're talking here, like when we talk of feminism and gender justice, it's actually beyond numbers. We're not just counting the number of women taking lead roles or being directors of environmental justice movement. In the same way, like we'll probably see in the next 10, 20 years, more and more women taking in prominent roles in corporate world, even in the fossil fuel industry, maybe longer, but we've seen that wave in the environmental justice movement, especially in the South. In terms of number, we have come a long way. But definitely gender justice goes beyond number. It's actually the framing as well. And there's much more orientation, really expression of that in the environmental justice movement, like in the place where I am, no, in Southeast Asia, in Asia Pacific in general, there's much more strong assertion of that, the gender lens, no, the gender justice to be incorporated in the whole discussion of environmental and climate justice. I think that that's a good direction. But it's not that we can do it in one part of the world and then the rest of the world goes business as usual. We would really want to see that happening in the rest of the world, because again, it's not just about counting numbers, but really incorporating gender lens, the gender justice within the environmental justice movement and also in the climate justice movement, as you mentioned. And as we started the discussions, our stories earlier, we're still fighting even within the movement, no, like really calling out. Like I even have friends who really not just call out, but really assert physically, you know, like to the border, in the border of violence, really asserting that gender justice practice, not just orientation among us. So it's really a continuing education for all of us, even among us as feminists, as advocates of just gender justice. Even the use of language, for example, like I myself have been not a victim, even a culprit. No, I've been called out many times by colleagues in the past, like, oh, stop using that language because that's really antithetical, no, to gender justice. So I really keep on checking ourselves, and to me, that's a good process, like criticizing and reflecting on ourselves, on each other, because you know, we are products of patriarchy, long generations of patriarchy, and it's really a process, continuing process to shed that. Like I am sure it's really doubly hard for our friends in the North, no, really encountering whiteness all over and maleness, and not to mention the age side, and even among us, no, in the South, especially in cultures that really promote patriarchy, that really is based on patriarchy. So it's really a continuing struggle, continuing education. And there's also another integration that we all need to be very conscious about, like its integration among movements. You know, the environmental and climate justice movement and gender justice and women's movement. There's a lot of effort towards that, like in the region where I am, in Asia Pacific, like we have this umbrella called Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism that continuously pushes for integration of those concerns, including LGBT concerns, the concerns of persons with disabilities, incorporating those in one comprehensive, holistic view of engagement that incorporates the different lenses, the different histories and experiences that we're bringing, and different struggles that we're bringing into the movement that we are in. You know, like I think while we are critical of the maleness, the whiteness, the ageism on the other side that breeds the kind of inequality and based on patriarchy that we are facing, that we are struggling with. We are also in that juncture of history where we're trying to incorporate all the movements that we have now at the present, that are products of decades of struggles at the local, national, and global level into one comprehensive, holistic, also strategic, and conscious about intergenerational responsibilities and justice into one movement that could not just critique, but offer very sound and practical solutions that are relevant on the ground, at the same time doable at the national and global level. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful. Like I've spent more than half of my life into this movement, and I've seen advances that I did not imagine. Like I also see that there's a lot still that we need to change, especially on the political side. But I am very, very hopeful. Also very glad about new movements that have been brought about by the multiple crises that we're facing, such as the Friday for the Future. There's also a lot less political movements that are also as conscious, also as concerned, but needs to be incorporated in the fold for us to be much more strategic in addressing all these crises and presenting a doable solution.
Thank you. My next round would be a question about how could men improve their behavior. So this is a question sometimes men are asking me, how can I be now a feminist? How can I change? How can I step out of the system of patriarchal behavior? And I think that's really important. It's important also to talk about what can men do. And I think that also some are listening, and maybe some have especially this question about, okay, where should I start? Where should I start to change? Because, well, we want to create a feminist world, an equal world, and also without toxic behavior of the patriarchal system, which is also hurting men. And so I would love to make a round, and if you like, that you can tell the first things that maybe a man can do or change to be part of our feminist climate justice movement, or to improve, or to just to think about. So yeah, this is not a normal round of questions, but I think it's very important. So where would you start, or what would you ask if a man would tell you where to change, or what is important, which could be the first step? So does someone wants to start?
Is Dorothy trying to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
I can start. I'm so happy that men asked you what they can do to change and where they can start to improve. In my opinion, it should start by being interested in hearing about our stories. Like if we can involve them, if they can come to our meetings like this one and listen to us and listen to what that we don't mean any harm when we fight for the rights, when we fight for our rights to be, for our voices to be heard. I think it's very important, and that is the first step, because they cannot changing their behavior without hearing why. That's why when they come, they can hear how we suffer. We think they know, but sometimes they don't. For example, some men think that women's rights activists like me are there to spoil their women. They think that women's rights mean the women are going to be big-headed and stop being submissive to their husbands. But when they sit down with us during our talks and our workshops and listen, they'll go out with that urge to change, and they will even start fighting for women's rights themselves. So I think they should be sensitized to come and join us and listen to us. That's the very starting point from me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a cool first step. So, Neth or Helena, do you want to add something?
Shall I go next? And this is an example of a very basic question that is hard, no, to answer. You know, like to me, my instant reaction is to start at home. You know, like in order for you to see, for men to see the problem in society, the gender issues that confront women in society, you have to start from home. Like patriarchy starts at home, and it's also the place where it has to be addressed at its roots. Like I remember recently last year there was actually a Korean film that actually tackled this, the story of a woman going through the problems, confronting problems that are stemming from patriarchy, and there was really violent reaction among men, not just in Korea but also in other parts of Asia, because they think it's too harsh, they think it's not true, they think it's too dramatized. But to me, when I watch it, like I said, gosh, this is so true. And what Dorothy was saying, like confronting the fact, confronting the reality hard, in a hard way, that you have to be hard on yourself, on men, for men to be hard on themselves, to accept that this is the truth, rather than being close to being told that this is the problem. That closing your mind is actually not going to bring us anywhere in addressing the problem. It's just it won't go beyond words if we don't harshly accept the ugly reality that faces us in terms of gender inequality that exists at home, in the community, in society, and globally. Like it's hard to say for men to put themselves in women's shoes. That's not easy. If you are trapped in a patriarchal mind, the first thing is really to shed that. And shedding that does not happen overnight. As Dorothy said, like for men to be exposed on discussions, like sharing of experiences, also processes led by women is a step. But to me, what lies at the heart is also addressing this at the community level. Like in my past experiences in work when I was a lot younger, I was often confronted by incidents where women would arrange a meeting like in the evening, and half of the women will not show up because they're told by husband not to go because they're not yet finished about washing the dishes, putting the kids to sleep, cleaning the house before they even could attend to community issues. And the men, in many cases, would just be chatting away or even watching the TV, listening to the radio and all that. That prevents even women not to go into processes that would help them reflect and overcome the obstacles within the home and in the community that actually breeds patriarchy. So like we have to really bust this at the root, and it's actually at the home where it starts. Like all these CEOs in suits, the white aging CEOs, it's hard to judge them for what they are at home, but it would be good to reflect on what they are, on what we are, what we do at home, to be able to address problems in the community and also in society. So thanks for asking that very interesting question at 4 a.m., at my 4 a.m., Catherine.
Thank you so much. So Helena, do you also want to add something, or should we go to the next round?
Yeah, I feel like what's really important is to recognize that there's like, we can't get rid of, the patriarchy from one day to the next, as much as I would love that. And I feel like a lot of time, especially in the climate justice movement, men tend to think, okay, they're feminists now, then it's done. They've done everything they need to do and they can move on with their lives. And I feel like, we can't do that as women because we continue to be affected, by inequality and so on. And I think what's so important is that we recognize that it's a process. And, as people raised in this society, we can't get rid of our biases and the way we are brought up from one second to the next. And much more, it is a practice of working against that and working to listen to women, working to, educate yourself, to read, to listen constantly. And I feel like to know, without having the goal of being perfect, but much more having the goal to be better. And I think that is, something that if we take that to heart, and if men, really, instead of wanting to reach a status where they can say, oh, I'm not sexist, but much more to reach a status where they're working against being sexist, so they want to be less sexist, I think we could already make a lot of progress.
Thank you for this round. And because we didn't get any question from the audience yet, I think I would love to go to our final round. So we have 10 minutes less, more time than I thought. And because my last question or my last round would be that I would love to ask you about your own projects, because I know that every one of you is pretty busy and having a lot of different projects around the topic of climate justice. And so I would love to ask you if could you present your projects and also maybe tell us a little bit about how you tackle the question of gender justice inside your projects. So how you are dealing with this struggle daily in your projects. That would be maybe a really practical thing to know about. And also, if you like, you can also tell us, because most of the audience we have today, it's from Germany. And if you like, you can also tell us how we can maybe support from Germany the projects, if there is any chance. Okay, Dorothy, would you love to start? Because I know a project from Uganda, which is pretty cool and which people need to know about.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Like I introduced myself in the beginning, I am the founding chairperson of Kona Women Sustainable Agriculturalists and Environmental Group. And this is a registered organization. It is what we call community-based organization. And it's not like a big one, but it's for for grassroots women. And when we realized that there is a lot of cutting of trees and our forests are disappearing, we said we should do something about it. But also we said, that by doing so, by protecting the environment, we should also think about the livelihoods of women. So besides planting vegetables that we sell off, we decided to put up a project. It's called Briquettes Project. Briquettes are an alternative energy used for cooking or heating. In Uganda, we don't do heating that much. It's almost summer every time. So we use it for cooking. So in Uganda, the commonly used type of energy for cooking is firewood and charcoal. That firewood and charcoal is got by cutting trees. And the more we use charcoal and firewood, the more we lose our forests and trees. So we found out about that project of briquettes, which are made using the locally available materials. These materials include wastes, like banana peels, it can be potato peels, and then you can add in anthill soil, which is also got, which is available locally. And then there is a very cheap paste, which is called cassava flour. It is also mixed in there to act as starch, like to make the briquettes hard. So instead of using charcoal or firewood, we use those briquettes for cooking. And in doing so, we are saving the environment. We are saving money because charcoal has become so expensive in Uganda. So we save money, which we would have spent on buying charcoal, and we save our trees. Also, when we do extra than what we are using at home, we sell it to other people. But right now the project is not so big because we use our hands. There are some groups which use machines that we haven't yet bought. And also we would like to take that project to other villages and to other women, but we cannot do so because we need support in terms of mobilization, in terms of facilitating the trainers, in terms of like hiring a place where to train other women and other men. By the way, it's not only women it's a women's movement, it's a women's group, but also men come and join us when we are learning how to make briquettes. So that's one project that we have so far. And it is connected to gender, to gender and climate justice, because when women are empowered, when they are empowered economically, they are empowered socially. A poor woman doesn't have the courage to speak in public, but when you get some money from maybe selling those briquettes and from your products from agriculture, you can be encouraged to speak in public. You will not be minimized. And when you're encouraged to speak in public, your voice will be heard. You can even go to decision-making structures and defend climate justice there. So that's how important our project is. We have many projects, but that's what I can talk about now, the briquettes project, which is running as per now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If it's okay, I would love to ask Helena in this round around like a special question, because right now we heard about the empowerment of women and how important it is. And I know, well, in Fridays for Future, most people who are speaking to the press are women. And so maybe there are some in the audience, some people who are thinking about creating another action group for climate justice. So can you share us a little bit of your experience, how to create an environment in your group to empower women?
Yeah, so I I'm not sure. I kind of never, I don't really like the discussion about empowering people, because I feel like in a lot of, like, women have power, like we don't need to be given it, and we don't really need to be handed it in that way. So I kind of don't like that word, to be honest. And I feel like in a lot of places, it's not just giving women power, it's making room for them, because, you know, the only reason why there's more, you know, women talking in the press is because there's not men talking in the press. So we can't, like, I think that's a huge misconception in a lot of places, that if we only need to, you know, empower women, and we only need to give them tools, and then, you know, we can reach equality. But we can there will only be more women in certain positions if there's less men there. And I feel like recognizing that and knowing that is really important step. And we've done that with Fridays for Future in some places, and it's, you know, quite visible in who's talking to the press. But I feel like it would be dishonest if I didn't recognize that that doesn't mean that, you know, we as a movement have gotten rid of inequality. And in a lot of places, if you take a look behind, you know, who's in the front rows, and if you take a look behind who's talking in the press, to, you know, who's talking most of the time in meetings, and, you know, who's deciding what we do, then that's not, it doesn't look quite as rosy to be anymore, to be honest. But I feel like we learned from the climate justice movement in a lot of places there. So looking at Ende Gelände, for instance, in Germany, who, I mean, you know all about that, Katrin, who, because, you know, they saw that even with you know, men and women in the press, in comparison, men would be quoted hugely more, who then decided to only have women press speakers. And, you know, that was a huge lesson, I think, that we learned as a climate movement, and that definitely also shaped a lot of what we do with Fridays for Future, and in the press, and in our work on the outside. So I'm not sure if that was a satisfying answer, because it's not an easy 1, 2, 3, this is what you need to do. But creating room, making space is, I think, what was really important, and what makes it possible for women to live their power and to be in the press and so on.
Thank you. So, Neth, do you also want to share like a story or advice?
Definitely. Yeah, I fully agree with what Helena said, that making space, for to make space for women, and also allowing them, enabling them to take that space is key. And the two initiatives that I will talk about is actually about that. One is an initiative of ETC group, which is recently launched. We call it the Which Way Forward. Which Way Forward is actually a dialogue among civil society and social movement actors across regions: Africa, Asia, Latin America, and North America, and Europe. This is online, of course, to reflect, to allow, provide a space for civil society actors, taking very, very conscious effort to allow women, to bring in women into the discussion, for actors and actresses to reflect together on the role of technology in their current lives, under the shadow of the pandemic. Also discussing the role of technology and technological solutions that are being peddled to address the climate, biodiversity, and environmental crisis that we are facing. Because it's also not a coincidence that all these discussions on the gravity and seriousness of the problems, the crisis in biodiversity, climate, and environment, are actually have actually been a lot stronger during the months of the pandemic, and when people felt that we are helpless because we're at home, that we are kept in our rooms and in our homes because of fear. of being contaminated by COVID and all this crisis ringing in your head in the media, which does not only aggravate the fear, but also promote helplessness and powerlessness. So the which way forward discussion is for us to reflect on that, to bring out the power within, for us to do together, to do things together in our homes, from our homes, and in a collective way, and bringing the views of women into this. And as I've noted from the beginning of this discussion, we would also like to provide, the aim is to provide space, for women to voice out and express their views on technology, coming from their experiences at home, in the community, in society, and also in global engagement. And we'd like to bring the discussions forward from this series of Which Way Forward dialogues, in reflecting on the views of civil society and social movement on the technologies that are being put forth as solutions, and present this as well to discussions among civil society and also in governments, and also at intergovernmental level. The next initiative that I'd like to mention is actually on promoting community resilience through field schools. I am in the board of a national NGO called Rice Watch Action Network that we have actually started some 20 years ago. And they have actually pioneered the whole practice of community resilience field school, and they have been implementing it in many parts of the Philippines, and the model has actually also been adopted in other parts of Asia, and they've got some citations and awards at the global level for doing this. They work with government, with local government, and with movements at the local level. And climate resilience field school actually builds on the experiences and reflections of local people, in particular women, on ways, and means, including technological and also social innovations, to address challenges in agriculture posed by the multiple crises that we're facing. So concretely in adaptation, for example, making use and optimizing indigenous and local technologies, in particular those that are practiced by women at the local level, to adapt to and also mitigate the climate, the consequences of the climate crisis, which actually brings projects like women-led selection and breeding of adapted seeds, in particular rice, because the Philippines is a rice-growing country. We do import because there's so much demand, and there's also a big pressure on the rice growing communities with regards to problems on the environment, and also much more because of trade and also policies, agricultural policies. So there's a lot of experiences that are actually being promoted in the climate resiliency field schools about the lessons and also the practices and knowledge of women in breeding and selecting adaptable rice varieties, depending on the ecosystem and also depending on the ecological stresses that are faced at the local level, such as flooding, salinity, and even drought. Because you are in a country like the Philippines, it's actually the extremes, that are being felt with regards to the consequences of global warming. Also, the practices of women in water management, in agriculture, and also promoting women-led livelihood that are centered around agricultural production and also processing of agricultural products. So there's a lot there in terms of promoting, and as I mentioned, these initiatives on CRFS, the Community Resilience Field Schools, have been cited in the Philippines and also globally, in particular the primary role played by women farmers in these initiatives and building on and promoting their knowledge systems and integrating gender justice in the whole discussion of addressing the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis as well. So those are two initiatives that I'd like to share at this point.
That's so cool. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the information you gave us this evening and for being here. It was an honor to have this panel discussion, the final panel of our conference with you together. And I loved to bring you together and to hear your different perspectives and views about climate justice and feminism. I hope that I see you again soon. Maybe on Zoom, maybe at the next UN Climate Conference when we are all together, hopefully again, fighting for fighting for more voices of the Global South and fighting for more voices of women inside the negotiations. And I love that we are on the same page when it's come in terms of, okay, we have to end the patriarchal system to fight the climate crisis, and also we have to build more groups where we support each other, and it also the man has to learn how to break loose from patriarchal structures and behavior. And also I love that I learned again so much from you and heard your stories, and every time it gave me so much more hope and also so much more strength to continue the fight for climate justice, especially here in Germany, our local struggle. And so for me, it's really from my heart, thank you so much for being part of this panel, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Katrin.